Alright, well, we're off on another episode of reading some short stories out of this volume. This time I'm going to be looking at the horror fiction section, and starting with Sandman by E.T.A Hoffman from 1816. And then I'll be reading The Picture in the House by H.P. Lovecraft from 1924. So I'll take a read through of those, and I'll see you on the other side. I've got two short stories here to go through, so it's a little bit quicker than usual. The first one is Sandman by E.T.A Hoffman, and I'd say the first thing that comes to mind on this one is that it's not really just a short story. It's sort of like three short stories about things that happen. They just happen to be involving the same character, but they're intermixed in a connected storyline of this character's unfortunate life. I would say I'd rate it about a 7.5 out of an 8.2. Each of the short stories was kind of an interesting short story. I don't know that they all had to be the same character and kind of shoehorned together like that, but the ideas were fun, so let's get into those. The idea of a Sandman that steals the eyes of children who stay awake and wears I had this vision of him wearing one of those old plague doctor masks with a beak. The story describes the Sandman living in the moon and feeding the eyes of children to his children, or little Sandmen. So, I mean, the idea of telling the story of that kind of horror character would be kind of a good story to practice a horror story on. The idea of Sandman being a type of supernatural state, like a job or something somebody acquires or is recruited to. They travel the shadows at night using their abilities to tap the dreams of other people for some unknown purpose, whatever works for the story. And the recruits are people who are night owls by nature and imaginative, so you can kind of set it up so that anybody could be a Sandman, and they have to be recruited to do it, but anybody has the potential if they're the right kind of person. And the main character of a story might catch a Sandman and think they are monsters, and there may in fact be murderous Sandmen out there. There could be the possibility for good and bad Sandmen, and the main character might find out along the way after his fighting off the Sandmen that he could be one of them. An automaton built to fool people that she is human. I like the idea of taking this story where as the automaton tries to learn the techniques of acting human, it learns more about how humans are and live, and the more she does it, the more she does not like the lie of trying to be a human. Whether that's because she thinks they're flawed or because she thinks it's a cruel, hateful thing to do to pretend to be something you're not. And yes, this is literally one of the parts of this one short story, going from Sandman living in the moon stealing people's eyeballs to an automaton pretending to be human. It's a bit of a ride. Automaton built and non-functional to the frustration of its creator, except when it finally is caught with the spirit of somebody summoned by a medium, or a poltergeist or something takes over the automaton. I like the idea of a purely mechanical being not quite working, and the medium poltergeist field being some kind of off-the-touch thing that not many people have to deal with, but when you put the two of them together, you have the potential for a created being to come into being. Is the child of an alchemist sneaks in and sees their father and a partner practicing alchemy, and the father gets killed by the partner, and his spirit is distilled and contained by his killer, who flees and uses his spirit to become younger. And so the child takes on the study of the alchemical texts the father had to master the art of alchemy and then pursue his father's killer, who the father's killer is continuing to do this to other people and becoming younger or disguising himself through the distilled spirits of people he's partnered with and then killed for their spirit. And then a child has nightmares about a dark figure coming into their home as they're sick and cutting them to pieces and then stitching them back together. And their nightmares as he goes through his childhood of being a sick child, and as he gets older he's still sick, but it starts to come to light that this isn't a person making him sick by cutting him up and hurting him. It's a person who's replacing his dying parts with mechanical parts that he can't tell aren't real as he gets older. So someday it's revealed that so much of him has been whittled away that he's half machine and never knew it. And that's why he's never gone anywhere or been out in public for very long, because of the risk of exposing that secret to him and others. So that was the first story. The second story is The Picture in the House by H.P. Lovecraft. I'd give it a 9.3 out of a 10.7. I had to reread the end of this story to understand the ending. It was a little different, and it wasn't quite what I was expecting. There were a lot of points, and I mean, it's probably good for this, because that's what I like to do on the show, is I expected things to happen that didn't. And so we'll touch on those. I half expected this to be about a painting over the mantle of an old man, exactly as he looked clearly hundreds of years ago. Having gotten a token or a recipe for some concoction from Africa, he's essentially become immortal, and that's who he encounters in the house, and doesn't know it until he sees the picture over the mantle. I also expected that there would be something about a link to the character's family history, which is what he originally went along this path to research. He was in this area to try to learn more about his genealogy, and I kind of wanted to find out that he's reading this book and it displays things about white cannibals in Africa, and in discovering some of this, maybe he learns that they're his ancestors, and what does that mean about him? I almost felt that the main character's uneasiness in part of the story with the concepts was less to do with the topic being abhorrent to him, and more kind of like if you've ever stood on the edge of a building and looked down and there's that little voice in the back of your head that says, this isn't so bad, and so you lean further and further over, and then you just get terrified for a minute that you're going to fall over because your body doesn't have the common sense to know not to lean over that far. The idea that there's a part of him that's totally embracing the idea of becoming one of these things in this book that terrifies him. And that part takes over more and more. So it's like an idea of him losing his sanity, and at the end there's a scene where there's a spot of blood that appears on the page of the book as if dripping down, and my first thought when I couldn't fully understand what the implication was that he had just reflexively attacked and killed the old man. And so the idea of his body just taking over and killing people while he's kind of watching it happen as he goes insane, that was kind of one of the things I felt happening. I want to take this story premise a bit further and imagine a terrible story of a sheep farm where somebody comes to it and is talking with the person who manages it, only to find out later that the sheep that they're using to make meat and wool are humans, and they're using human hair to make wool, but they take people and they pen them up and they lobotomize them, and they're just living out there in these pens like animals. That's a horror story waiting to happen. I wanted the book to have the book that they're talking about in the story to have untranslated dark magic. That the main character, as somebody who translates old documents to trace genealogy, has enough understanding of to maybe suss out the meaning. And as he translates it, he's discovering what's going on, and so the person who lives in the house cripples him to keep him prisoner to translate the rest of the work. And so the possibility of him translating this work and getting enough knowledge for himself to use for his own escape, but then you have the idea of a fairly decent, upstanding person learning and using dark magics to protect himself. And it's the use of dark magic. Would it corrupt him? Does it make him less of a good person? Does he have to do things that there could have been a nicer way to do it, but his only option is to use the evil way to do it? Is sort of similar to number 5 in the translating a text and finding the dark mysteries in the book. But in this case, translating it for your captor but not using any of it for yourself, but mistranslating it for your captor so that when things go wrong, he takes the brunt of it all and you're left by yourself to escape afterwards. Because nobody's keeping you prisoner anymore, you're allowed to get away. But to set the villain up for a fall by giving him bad information. That's another story idea on there. And so basically these two stories were kind of fun to do. I don't usually do horror, but they were well done. I liked them, and they gave me some good ideas on that. And hopefully they gave you some good ideas. So I'll see you tomorrow for some more ideas.